I was inspired to try to do Mycroft Holmes because I felt that Mycroft was a very interesting character in the Sherlock Holmes stories. He's mentioned in about 6 or 7 of the original stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. And he's not very clearly defined. We know that he is overweight and solitary. He only goes between his offices at the British Foreign Office, his apartments, and a club that he co-founded called the Diogenes Club. And that's it. That's really what we know. Sherlock Holmes says about his older brother Mycroft that he is very superior, of very superior intelligence. His deductive powers are at least the equal of Sherlock's. He works for the British government, but sometimes he is the British government. So in the middle of it, in the later 19th century, which is when the story takes place, the Great Britain was a world superpower. So at that time, Sherlock's brother was running the British government from time to time. This, left a whole area, a huge area, for us to explore and define, because nobody knows how he got to that point. So basically, what I did was write Mycroft Holmes' backstory. And, that's what it was all about, and it deals with an area that hasn't been covered by Arthur Conan Doyle, and it gave me and my co-writer a really big area to cover and deal with and invent stories about. So.
Because I've been around Kareem quite a bit, in all kinds of situations. He tells me things, and it's interesting, and it makes me laugh sometimes. So one time he started telling me how he employed some of these Sherlock Holmes theories into his basketball game. So maybe you could share one of those with everyone, Kareem.
Well, those of you who follow the NBA know how competitive it is. And I was in Detroit. We had to play the Pistons, and they had a very good center named Bob Lanier. A lot of you might remember Bob. Yeah. And I heard the ball boys talking at halftime, and they were really annoyed because they had to go and air out the shower room in the Pistons locker area because Bob Lanier and the coach, Ray Scott, smoked cigarettes at halftime. They were nicotine fiends, and they had to just get down a couple of cigarettes at halftime. So knowing that, I realized that if I could make Bob run a lot in the second half, he would be in pain, and that I would have an advantage. How us athletes are. So I started to put it together that you pay attention to what's going on around you, you might be able to pick up a few things that could give you an advantage or give you a tip about this, that, or the other. And I've tried to put it into use in my life.
So, Kareem, in the Sherlock Holmes stories, his sidekick is Watson, okay, Dr. Watson, but your sidekick is Cyrus Douglas. And why don't you tell us, why did you decide to develop first like a black character, but not just a black character, he was quite equal to Mycroft Holmes, but a black character in 1870 in London was pretty unusual. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, actually, a black character was not that unusual in London because the British had really colonized the world. There were people from all the British colonies that ended up in London at one time or another. So you had people from Africa, China, India, and the Middle East. The British government controlled Australia, New Zealand. During that time, it was said that the sun never sets on the British Empire, and that was quite accurate. Somewhere in the British Empire, the sun was shining because the British controlled land around the world. So I picked a country that Great Britain controlled during the 19th century and brought somebody from that country to take Mycroft on a guided tour of his country. That would be what that was all about. And the country I chose, because my family is from that country, is Trinidad. So my character, his name is Cyrus Douglas, and he's from Trinidad, and he has made a life for himself importing tobacco and fine spirits into Great Britain in the 1870s. He's made a business for himself, and he's thriving. He has to take certain precautions because of the resentment that the people of Great Britain had for foreigners. So he hires a couple of British people to act like they own his tobacco shop. Mm. They act like they are presiding over the tobacco shop, but actually it's his tobacco shop, and he has traveled the world and understands so much about the tobacco industry, and also fine spirits like Armagnac, which is a type of brandy that comes from France. And his business thrives, but he understands that he has to do it in a certain way that does not bring too much attention and suspicion to himself. He remains a secondary figure to the public, when actually this is a business that he owns and runs.
Why did you make the character so multifaceted so that he could really be not just a sidekick, but really and truly Mycroft's partner?
Well, in those days, any black man that was doing well had to be multifaceted and capable in a lot of ways, including knowing how to fight.
So that's how I learned about capoeira, was from Kareem, with this as well. So, you said your family was from Trinidad, and was your grandmother from there too? Was your grandmother from Trinidad?
Of course.
Okay. So is she the one that told you the stories about the blood-sucking vampires?
Yes.
Okay.
My grandmother, I'd go to Brooklyn when I was a kid, and my grandmother had to put us to bed, and in order to scare us into not getting out of bed, she'd tell us horror stories about vampires and stuff from Brooklyn. From Trinidad, I'm sorry, from Brooklyn. In Brooklyn. And she'd tell us stories, and we'd cower under the covers until the light of day, when we knew it was safe to come out. But because of her, that's how I learned about my culture and my heritage. Some of the stories that she told us about home. And one of the things that she would enjoy about my grandmother, when they came to America, they had to come by boat. So they took a boat from Belize City to Mobile, Alabama. And then, my family came here in 1917. In 1917, smart black people did not stop in Mobile, Alabama. They kept going. So they got to Mobile and then took the train to New York and settled in Brooklyn. And my grandmother had never really, prior to that, left the island of Trinidad, so she didn't really understand how big the world was. And she was apprehensive on a 3-day trip from Mobile to New York, because she thought the train was going to go off the land and into the water. She just thought that the train would end up and drive into the ocean. And she would tell us stories like that. And I was like, geez, Grandma. I said, it was a long trip, child. It was a long trip.
So, okay, in your book, I guess a lot of the peripheral characters that you and Anna developed were real, based on people in real history. Can you tell us about, say, for example, the Oxford crew, the governor from Trinidad, maybe Cardwell? Can you tell us about some of those characters?
Yeah, a number of the people that you will encounter in the novel were real people. So all the people, the story starts with the Oxford-Cambridge boat race, the crew race, and all of the people on the victorious Cambridge crew are mentioned by their names. The Secretary of State for War of the British government was Mr. Cardwell. He's in the book. And the governor of Trinidad,
Gordon?
Yes.
Gordon.
He was a real person. And there are a number of other real people in there that are kind of like, what do they call them? Easter eggs. In that if you know anything about British history or the Sherlock Holmes stories, you'll recognize them. And if you don't, you'll just think it's just another another character in the book. So it's in there for you to find and enjoy or figure out as you wish.
And I learned about this from Kareem, but you have the Order of the Harmonious Fist in the book. Tell us about that and what that means.
The Order of Harmonious Fist was a Chinese tongue. A tongue is like, I don't know, more or less like one of those Sicilian clubs in Brooklyn. Only it's Chinese people. And they get together like that to protect themselves and to protect their businesses. And Trinidad, after the abolition of slavery, the British started moving people around the British Empire that could work in the sun that weren't slaves. So at Trinidad, they started to import people from India and China. So Trinidad has a large Chinese population. And of course, our sidekick character, Douglas, he originally started studying martial arts with the Chinese people that he befriended in Trinidad. And then in his travels, especially to Brazil, he gets to learn capoeira. So he's a very well-trained martial artist. And the Chinese people of Trinidad are depicted in there. And the Harmonious Fist was a tongue that was there, and they organized their communities in Trinidad and other parts of the British Empire, and protected themselves through their pulling together. They were very unified in that sense.
See, this is really it's a history book wrapped in a mystery novel, so it's really cool.
Working with Coach Wooden was a real joy because he was very different from most coaches. You know, if you go around today to any coach that's coaching NC2A basketball, they would give anything to win the national championship, including, you know, one of their arms or a favorite child. Coach Wooden wasn't about that. He wanted us to learn how to play the game, and he wanted us to learn how to be good citizens, get our degrees, and learn how to be good parents and good husbands. And that's really what he was all about. And winning basketball games, that was secondary to what we learned in terms of life lessons. So dealing with somebody that was that remarkable was a real privilege, and we all miss him. You know. A good 20 years ago, I was involved in a movie about Vernon Johns. Vernon Johns was Martin Luther King's mentor. And most people don't know too much about him, but he's the one that taught Martin Luther King about activism. And he was a real firebrand guy. His ministry was in Alabama and Virginia, I believe. And he really would challenge the people that came to his church. He challenged them to go out and confront Jim Crow racism at a time when people were getting lynched. And he told them that they couldn't be afraid, they had to do it. And they were like, well, no, we're going to go a lot slower. A lot of people in his congregation were middle-class people, doctors and lawyers, and people who had achieved some bit of success, and they felt that they would lose all of that. And he said, none of that is worth anything unless you have first-class rights as citizens. And he was tougher on the people in his congregation than any other of the preachers that were involved in the early energy of the civil rights movement. And I did a movie about him. I helped produce a movie about him, working with James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones played Vernon Johns in that movie. And it showed a couple of years on TV in January during Martin Luther King week. I guess they've stopped showing it, but it never really got any traction. But I was just happy to do it, and every now and then somebody asks about it because it's a very inspirational story. He walked into an all-white cafeteria and ordered a sandwich, right? And some people came up to him, and one guy came and put a pistol on the counter and said, "You're going to need that pistol to eat the sandwich." And Vernon John said, "Oh, is that right?" So he didn't leave the place. And all these people gathered around him, and they brought him a sandwich, and they were all looking at him, with a lot of hostility. He said, "Before I'm going to eat the sandwich, I have to say something over it, having to do with Jim Crow." And they all looked at each other and they said, "What are you talking?" He said, "God damn Jim Crow." And then he took a bite of the sandwich, and they were in shock, and they didn't do anything to him. But that's the type of person he was, and he's the one that Martin Luther King sat with and learned about how they had to confront Jim Crow racism and not deal with fear or any of those other issues. And this is in right after World War II that most of this happened. Like everybody else in my high school, I was a Muhammad Ali fan, and especially after he punched out Sonny Liston, I thought that was wonderful. And I was a fan of his, and he's the one that, because of him, I became interested in Malcolm X, and through that, my interest in Islam. I went to hear him speak at the Armory right here on 143rd Street, where the black Muslims used to have their rallies. And I've been friends with him ever since then. He spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, so I got to know him. But he's somebody that all of us used to lie and say that we were related to him. Because we admired him so much. And it was really, they just did an event for him in Louisville. And he's not doing too good because of his Parkinson's. But he's very brave and a great person for the example that he set for all black Americans. I started wanting to be a writer when I was in the 5th grade. I enjoyed it. And I went to school up in Inwood. The nuns up there could see that I could write a little bit there. They encouraged me. And I really got the bug while I was going to UCLA. And there was a time we had to all hand in our essays to be graded. I was an English major and a history major. And I handed in my essay, and the teacher, when he was giving back the essays that we were going to get our grades on, the teacher said, "I'm going to read the three best essays." So they read the first two. I'm like, "Geez, how long is he going to read the essay and give me my grade so I can get out of here?" Lo and behold, he read my essay as the best one. And I wrote it about going to the Village Vanguard and hearing Polonius smoke. And he thought it was fascinating and well written, and it was at that point that I realized that maybe I could write. But then after I got out of UCLA, I had this whole career in, what do they call it, the NBA? That kind of was a distraction. But now that I'm through with the NBA, I have time to write and pursue this, and it's been fun.